In a small mountain town in the northern United States, one old man has a rule that sounds crazy. He never locks his door at night. Not once. Not ever. His neighbors think he's foolish. Bears live in that forest. Wolves too. Some say things worse than wolves. But he still leaves the door open. Every single night. For 40 years. Here's the strange part. In 40 years, nothing has ever hurt him. Something else happens instead. Creatures come to his door. One at a time. Quiet. Careful. They wait. They never break inches. They never growl. They simply knock, in their own way, and wait for him to answer. But one night, everything changed. That night, it wasn't one creature. It wasn't two. It was every single living thing in that forest, lining up outside his cabin, one after another, from sunset until sunrise. By the time the sun came up, this old man understood three things he never wanted to know. First, the forest had been protecting him his whole life, not the other way around. Second, something was coming. Something so dangerous that every creature for 50 miles would rather face, human, than face it alone. And third, the old man was about to find out who he really was, and why the forest chose him instead of anyone else. This story sounds like folklore, but according to journals kept by the man himself, and stories passed through his small town, every strange detail is treated as true by the people who lived near that forest. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The forest sat at the edge of a small town called Miller's Hollow, tucked into the mountains of the Pacific Northwest. Nobody could say exactly how old the forest was. The trees stood taller than any trees for 100 miles. Some of them looked like they had grown there since before the town existed. An old man named Elias lived at the very edge of that forest. His cabin was small. It had one bedroom, one fireplace, and a porch that creaked when the wind blew. Elias was 71 years old. His hair had turned fully gray. His hands were rough from years of work. He walked with a slight limp from an old injury nobody in town could remember the story of. People in Miller's Hollow called him the Old Healer, not because he was a real doctor. He wasn't. But everyone in town knew that if you got hurt badly enough, and the hospital was too far away, you went to Elias first. He always answered his door. Day or night. Didn't matter who you were. But what most people in town did not know was this. Elias didn't only heal people. He healed something else too. Something from deep inside that ancient forest. It started slowly, many years ago, back when Elias was a much younger man. He remembered that first night clearly. Even now, he had heard a soft scratching sound outside his door. Not loud, not scary, just a quiet scratch, like something small asking to come inches. When he opened the door, he found a deer lying on his porch. Its leg was bent the wrong way. Blood soaked into the wood beneath it. The deer didn't run. It didn't fight him. It simply looked up at him with big, dark eyes, as if it somehow knew he could help. Elias didn't understand why an animal would trust a human like that. Deer were supposed to be afraid of people. But this one wasn't. It waited calmly while he wrapped its leg with cloth and set the bone the best he could. By morning, the deer was gone. No blood trail. No sign it had struggled to leave. Just gone, like it walked away on its own, healed faster than any injury should heal. Elias thought it was strange, but he didn't think much more of it. Not until 3 nights later, when something knocked on his door again. This time it wasn't a deer. It was something he had never seen before. Something with fur so dark it looked almost black in the moonlight, with markings that seemed to glow faintly, like tiny blue stars scattered across its skinches. It stood taller than any wolf he had ever heard of. Its eyes glowed a soft gold, like two small lanterns in the dark. Elias froze. Every instinct in his body told him to run. But the creature didn't move toward him. It didn't growl. It simply stood there, at the edge of his porch, watching him with those glowing eyes. Then it stepped back, into the shadows of the trees, and disappeared. Elias didn't sleep that night. He sat by his window with a rifle across his lap, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The forest stayed silent until morning. Over the next few weeks, more animals came to his door. A rabbit with a wounded ear, a fox with a broken tail, a young bear cub, alone, with a thorn stuck deep in its paw. Each one waited patiently while he helped them. Each one left without harming him. Word never spread through town about this. Elias kept it quiet. He worried people would think he'd lost his mind. Or worse, that they would come with guns to protect him from creatures that clearly meant him no harm. But deep down, Elias began to feel something shift inside him. He began to understand, slowly, that this forest was not like other forests. Something ancient lived within it. Something that watched. Something that chose him, specifically, for reasons he did not yet understand. The nights became a routine. A soft knock. An injured creature. A quiet hour of care. Then silence until the next visitor came. Elias never asked questions out loud, but in his mind, one question grew louder every single night. Why me? He had no family left in Miller's Hollow. His wife had passed many years before. His children had moved away to bigger cities, rarely calling, rarely visiting. He lived alone, mostly forgotten by the world outside his small cabin. Maybe that was exactly why the forest had chosen him. He had nothing left to lose, and nowhere else he needed to be. Years passed this way. The visits became normal to him, almost peaceful. He grew to recognize certain animals. The dark wolf-like creature with the glowing markings became a regular visitor, though it rarely needed his help. It simply watched him from the trees some nights, as if checking on him, as if making sure he was still there, still willing. Elias began to call it umbra, a word he remembered from an old book, meaning shadow. He never once thought that one single night would change everything he believed about that forest, about himself, and about what was actually happening in the wilderness beyond his cabin. That night was coming closer than he knew. It happened on a cold October evening, 41 years after that very first knock. Elias was older now. His joints ached more than they used to. His hands shook slightly when he held his coffee cup. But his mind was still sharp, and his habits hadn't changed. Every night, he left his door unlocked. Every night, he kept a lantern burning by the window, just in case. That evening started like any other. He made a simple dinner of soup and bread. He sat by the fire, reading an old paperback he had read a dozen times before. The forest outside was calm. No wind. No sound of animals moving through the brush. Then, just after sunset, he heard the first knock. It wasn't unusual. He stood up slowly, grabbed his lantern, and walked to the door. When he opened it, he expected to see a small animal, maybe a rabbit or a fox. Instead, he saw Umbra. The great wolf-like creature stood at the edge of his porch, larger than Elias remembered. Its glowing markings pulsed faster than usual, almost like a heartbeat. There was a fresh wound across its shoulder, deep and still bleeding. Elias had seen Umbra injured before, but never like this. Never with such urgency in its glowing eyes. He stepped aside, letting the creature in without hesitation. Umbra limped through the doorway and lay down near the fireplace, breathing heavily. As Elias knelt down to examine the wound, something strange happened. Umbra let out a low sound, almost like a growl, but softer, more controlled. It wasn't aggressive. It was communication. Elias had spent enough years around this creature to understand its moods, even without words. This sound was different. It carried urgency. Warning. "What is it?" "Old friend," Elias whispered, more to himself than to the creature. Umbra's eyes shifted toward the door. That's when Elias heard the second knock. He paused, confused. Umbra was already inside. Who else could be outside his door this soon? He opened it carefully and found a family of foxes waiting. Not one, not two, an entire group, huddled together, eyes wide with fear. Behind them, in the shadows of the trees, more shapes were moving. Dozens of them. Small ones. Large ones. Creatures Elias had never seen in his entire life, with strange markings and unfamiliar shapes. His stomach tightened. Something was very wrong. He let the foxes inside, guiding them toward the corner of the room, near the fireplace but away from Umbra. They huddled together, shaking, watching the door with the same fearful expression. Before Elias could even process what was happening, a third knock came, then a fourth, then a fifth. Within the hour, his small cabin had become a shelter for creature after creature. A wounded owl, a limping badger, a group of small glowing insects that clustered near the ceiling like living stars. Nothing attacked each other. Nothing fought for space. They all seemed united by the same silent fear. Elias moved from one creature to another, doing what little he could to calm them, checking for wounds, offering water in shallow bowls. His hands trembled, not just from age now, but from the sheer size of what was unfolding around him. He had never seen this many creatures gather in one place, let alone inside his home. Around midnight, he stepped outside for a brief moment, needing air, needing space to think. What he saw outside stopped his heart. The forest was full of eyes. Every direction he looked, glowing eyes stared back at him from the shadows between the trees. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands, all waiting, all watching his cabin as though it were the only safe place left in the entire forest. He realized then that this wasn't just Umbra seeking help. This wasn't just a family of frightened foxes. This was every living creature in that forest, coming to his door in a single, terrifying night. And they weren't just afraid of getting hurt. They were afraid of something else. Something bigger than any wound Elias could treat with cloth and steady hands. He turned back toward Umbra, who was watching him from beside the fire, its glowing eyes locked onto his. "What's out there?" Elias asked quietly. "What's coming?" Umbra didn't answer, not in words. But its eyes shifted once more toward the deep darkness of the forest, toward something far beyond what human eyes could see. Elias stepped back inside and closed the door behind him, though it felt strange to close it now, after 40 years of leaving it open without second thought. Something about tonight told him the open door had never been a small, careless habit. It had always been an invitation, quietly waiting for exactly this moment. He moved slowly through the crowded room, careful not to step on anything in the dim lantern light. Every creature seemed to shift slightly as he passed, tracking him with quiet, careful eyes, as though checking that he was still calm, still steady, still the same man who had earned their trust, one small act of kindness at a time. He knelt beside the badger first, gently examining cut along its side. Its fur was matted with dried blood, and it flinched at his touch, but it did not pull away. Elias whispered softly as he worked, the same low, steady tone he had used with every animal for 4 decades. He didn't know if the words mattered. Maybe it was simply the sound of a calm voice that mattered most. Behind him, the small glowing insects clustered near the ceiling grew brighter, then dimmer, almost like a slow, quiet pulse. Elias glanced up at them more than once, wondering if they were communicating with each other, or perhaps with something much farther away. Time became difficult to measure. The fire burned low. Then Elias fed it more wood without thinking, his hands moving on instinct, while his mind stayed fixed on the growing crowd around him. Somewhere near midnight, he realized he had lost count of how many creatures had passed through his door. 20, 30, perhaps more. And still, more kept coming. Elias understood, in that moment, that this night was only the beginning. By 2 in the morning, Elias's cabin looked nothing like it had just hours before. Every corner held a creature. Every surface, every shadow, seemed to hold another pair of eyes watching him with quiet, desperate trust. He had run out of cloth for bandages an hour earlier. He had used every clean towel, every spare blanket, even strips torn from his own shirts. His hands ached from constant work, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop, not with so many still waiting. Outside, more creatures continued to arrive, though fewer now, spaced further apart. It was as though the forest itself was slowly emptying, creature by creature, all moving toward this one small cabin at its edge. Elias began to notice a pattern. The creatures didn't arrive randomly. They came in a certain order. Smaller, weaker animals first, then mid-sized creatures. Now, as the night stretched later, the larger and stranger beings began appearing at his door. One of them was unlike anything Elias had ever imagined existed. It stood almost 8 feet tall, with skin that shimmered like water under moonlight, and eyes that held not one, but 3 separate colors swirling together. It didn't speak, but when it looked at Elias, he felt something deep in his mind, almost like a message without words. Protect. Wait. Trust. He didn't understand how he understood it, but somehow, he did. Umbra remained close to him the entire night, acting almost like a guide, gently nudging Elias toward each new arrival, helping him prioritize who needed care first. It was as if Umbra was translating between 2 worlds that had never been meant to communicate so directly. Around 3 in the morning, Elias finally allowed himself a short break, sitting on the floor among the resting creatures, his back against the wall. His body was exhausted, but his mind raced faster than ever. He thought about the years he had spent alone in this forest, the quiet nights, the single knocks, the slow trust built between himself and these creatures over decades. He had always assumed it was simple kindness that brought them to him. A safe place. A gentle hand. But now he understood there was something much bigger happening. Something that had been building for years, maybe even for generations before he was born. He looked toward Umbra, who lay curled near the fireplace, watching him with steady, patient eyes. "You knew this night was coming," Elias whispered. "Didn't you? All those years, you were preparing me." Umbra didn't respond. Not directly. But its eyes softened slightly. And for the briefest moment, Elias felt something he couldn't quite explain. Not fear. Not comfort either. Something closer to responsibility. Like a duty passed silently from one guardian to another. The wind outside had grown stronger, rattling the windows gently. Elias noticed something odd about the sky through the glass. The stars looked different tonight. Brighter in some places, dimmer in others, as if something enormous was slowly moving across the heavens, blocking parts of the sky from view. He didn't know what it meant yet, but every creature in his cabin seemed to sense it too. Their breathing slowed. Their eyes turned toward the windows, toward the sky, toward whatever was approaching from somewhere far beyond the treetops. Elias stood up slowly, his joints protesting the movement, and walked toward the window. He pressed his hand against the cold glass, staring up at that strange, shifting sky. "What is that?" he whispered. For the first time that night, every creature in the room turned silent at once, as though holding their breath together, waiting for whatever was coming to finally arrive. Elias stood frozen at the window for a long moment, watching the sky twist and shift above the treetops. He thought back to his younger years, back before the first knock ever came, back when he had been an ordinary man with an ordinary life. He remembered his late wife telling him once that this forest felt different from other forests, that she always felt watched whenever they walked its trails together. He had laughed it off back then. He wasn't laughing now. He thought about his children too, grown and living far away in cities that felt like different worlds entirely. He hadn't told them about any of this. Not the healing, not the creatures, not the strange trust built over decades in the quiet dark. How could he explain something he barely understood himself? Some truths, he realized, were not meant to travel far from the place that created them. The shimmering, three-colored creature stepped closer to him again, its presence calm despite the tension filling the room. It tilted its head slightly, studying him the way a teacher studies a student on the edge of understanding something important for the first time. Elias exhaled slowly, steadying his racing heart. Whatever fear lived inside him, he pushed it down, the same way he had pushed down fear on that very first night, decades earlier, when a wounded deer had trusted a stranger simply because there was nowhere else to turn. If these creatures could trust him with their lives for 40 years, the least he could do tonight was trust them back. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but to Elias, it felt like an eternity. Then, far in the distance, a sound broke through the night. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't thunder. It was something entirely unfamiliar. A low, deep hum that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself, rattling the cabin's old wooden floorboards beneath his feet. Every creature inside the cabin tensed at once. Umbra rose to its feet immediately, positioning itself between Elias and the door, its glowing markings pulsing brighter than before, almost like a warning light. Elias's heart pounded in his chest. He had lived in this forest for over 40 years. He had heard every possible sound the wilderness could make. But this sound was different. It didn't belong to any animal, any storm, any natural force he understood. "What is that?" he asked again, louder this time, though he knew none of them could answer with words. The strange, tall, shimmering creature from earlier stepped closer to him. Its three-colored eyes locked onto his. And once again, Elias felt that same silent message pressing into his mind. Not animal, not forest, from beyond. Elias's breath caught in his throat. From beyond. Beyond what? Beyond the forest. Beyond the mountains. Or beyond something much larger than that. He thought of the strange sky he had seen through the window moments earlier, the way parts of it seemed to shift unnaturally, almost like something massive was passing silently overhead, hidden just beyond human sight. He remembered stories, old stories, passed down through generations in Miller's Hollow. Stories about lights in the sky above the forest. Strange disappearances of hunters who wandered too deep into the trees, never to be seen again. Stories dismissed for decades as nothing more than folklore, campfire tales meant to scare children into staying close to town. But standing here now, surrounded by creatures unlike anything found in any nature documentary or scientific record, Elias began to wonder if those old stories held more truth than anyone had ever imagined. The humming sound grew louder, closer. The cabin's windows rattled harder. Outside, Elias could see the treetops swaying, though there was no wind strong enough to explain such movement. Umbra let out a deep, rumbling sound, low and steady, almost like a command. Every creature in the cabin began moving at once, shifting positions, forming a loose circle around Elias, as though protecting him from whatever was approaching. Elias felt a strange mixture of fear and disbelief. For years, he had assumed he was the one protecting these creatures, healing their wounds, offering shelter. But now, in this single terrifying moment, he understood the truth had always been the opposite. They had been protecting him, all along, preparing him, building trust, night after night, creature after creature, for exactly this moment. The humming sound stopped suddenly. Complete silence followed, heavier and more unsettling than any sound could have been. Then, faintly at first, Elias heard something new. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within the tree line, moving steadily toward his cabin. Umbra's eyes locked onto the door, its entire body rigid with tension. Elias reached for the lantern beside him, his hands trembling as he lifted it higher, casting flickering light across the room full of creatures, all silently waiting, all silently trusting him to face whatever was coming next. He took a slow breath, steadying himself as best he could. His legs felt heavier with every step, not from age this time, but from the sheer weight of what he was about to face. He glanced once more around the crowded room, at the dozens of creatures who had trusted him with their most vulnerable moments over the years, now trusting him with something far greater than a wound or a broken bone. Umbra pressed close beside him, its shoulder brushing gently against his leg, a small gesture that felt almost like reassurance. Elias reached down without thinking and rested his hand briefly on the creature's head, the way he had done countless times before, though never with this much uncertainty hanging in the air. The footsteps outside grew closer, slow and deliberate, crunching softly over fallen leaves. Whatever was approaching wasn't rushing. It wasn't hunting blindly through the dark. It moved with purpose, with patience, as though it already knew exactly where it was headed. Elias thought briefly of the rifle leaning against the far wall. Unused for years, gathering dust in a corner he rarely visited anymore. He decided against it. Whatever waited beyond that door, he sensed, wouldn't be stopped by a weapon built for ordinary threats. Then, for the first time since this impossible night began, Elias walked toward his own front door, ready to open it, ready to finally understand the truth the forest had been hiding from him his entire life. Elias placed his hand on the cold wooden handle of the door. Behind him, dozens of creatures watched in complete silence, their breathing slow and careful, waiting for him to make the first move. He pulled the door open. Standing just beyond his porch was a figure Elias had never expected to see. It wasn't a monster. It wasn't some massive alien creature from beyond the stars, despite everything leading up to this moment. It was a young woman. She stood barefoot on the cold forest ground, wearing simple clothing that shimmered faintly under the moonlight, similar to the strange markings Elias had seen on Umbra and the other creatures throughout the night. Her eyes glowed a soft silver, calm and steady, holding none of the fear the animals around her carried. "You're the one they trust," she said softly. Her voice carried a strange, gentle accent, unlike anything Elias had heard before. Elias stared at her, speechless for a long moment. What are you?" "My name is Sira," she answered. "I come from a place far from here. My people crash-landed in this forest many years ago. We were forced into hiding, forced to live quietly among the trees, protected only by the creatures who chose to trust us." Elias's mind raced, trying to process everything at once. The glowing markings, the strange creatures, the silent messages passed into his thoughts. Suddenly, pieces of a puzzle he never knew existed began fitting together. "The forest," he whispered. "It's not just a forest, is it?" Sira shook her head slowly. "It's a shelter, a hidden refuge. For nearly 200 years, my people have lived here, protected by these creatures, waiting quietly, hoping never to be found by those who hunted us across the stars." "Hunted?" Elias asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight," Sira continued, "they found us." A chill ran down Elias's spine. Suddenly, the strange humming sound, the shifting sky, the desperate gathering of every creature in the forest, all of it made sense. "That's why they came to me," Elias said slowly, realization washing over him. "They knew this night was coming. They've been preparing me for this." Sira nodded. "You've spent your whole life earning their trust, one small act of kindness at a time. Tonight, they needed somewhere safe to gather, somewhere hidden from those searching the skies above us. Your home became that place." Elias looked around at the creatures, filling every corner of his small cabin. He thought about the very first knock decades ago, the injured deer left silently on his porch. He never could have imagined it was the beginning of something so much larger than himself. "What happens now?" Elias asked quietly. Sira's glowing eyes softened. "Now, we wait until sunrise. Their scanners cannot detect us clearly beneath the forest canopy, especially not here, surrounded by so many living signatures blending together as one. By morning, they will move on, believing there's nothing here but ordinary wildlife." Elias let out a slow breath, finally allowing himself a small, exhausted smile. "So we just wait." "Together," Sira said, "as we always have." Elias stepped back, allowing Sira to enter his cabin one final time that night, the last visitor among hundreds. As she crossed the threshold, calm returned to the room. The tense silence eased into something softer, something closer to relief. Elias sat down near the fireplace once more. Surrounded by creatures, he now understood far better than he ever had before. Umbra rested its head gently against his knee, its glowing markings finally settling into a slow, steady rhythm. As the first light of dawn began creeping through the windows, the humming sound from earlier had long since faded into nothing. The sky outside returned to its normal, familiar color, calm and untouched, as though nothing unusual had ever passed above the quiet mountains of Miller's Hollow. One by one, the creatures began to leave, slipping quietly back into the forest, their fear replaced by something closer to gratitude. Sira lingered a moment longer than the rest, standing at the doorway, looking back at Elias with a small, knowing smile. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all these years, for never asking why, for simply opening your door." Elias nodded slowly, still trying to process everything he had learned in single, impossible night. "I think," he said quietly, "some things aren't meant to be understood right away. Just trusted." Sira smiled once more before disappearing silently into the trees, leaving Elias alone in his cabin as the sun rose fully over the mountains, painting the forest in warm, golden light. In the days that followed, Elias's life returned to what looked, on the surface, like normal. He still left his door unlocked every night. He still kept his lantern burning by the window. But everything felt different now. He understood, finally, why the forest had trusted him for over 40 years. He wasn't simply a kind old man helping wounded animals. He had been chosen, tested, and trusted slowly, one small act of kindness at a time, to protect something far greater than himself. According to those close to Miller's Hollow, Elias never spoke publicly about that night, but those who knew him best say he changed after it happened. Quieter, more thoughtful, someone carrying a secret larger than the small mountain town around him could ever imagine. The forest remained peaceful in the months that followed. No strange lights returned to the sky. No unfamiliar humming disturbed the quiet nights. But somewhere deep within those ancient trees, life continued exactly as it always had, hidden safely beneath the surface of an ordinary Pacific Northwest forest. Elias never forgot that single knock decades earlier, the one that started everything. A wounded deer on his porch, trusting a stranger with nothing more than instinct and hope. Sometimes, the smallest acts of kindness lead to the largest truths. If this story opened your eyes to how much trust, patience, and quiet kindness can shape an entire hidden world, then wait until you hear what happens when Sira returns to Elias's cabin one final time, carrying a warning about a threat far greater than the one that came before. Let's take a moment to look back at what this story really taught us. Elias spent over 40 years building trust with creatures most people would have feared or ignored completely. That trust, built slowly through simple kindness, became the foundation for something far bigger than he ever imagined. When danger finally arrived, it wasn't strength or weapons that saved that hidden world. It was patience, quiet compassion, and decades of small, consistent choices. This story reminds us that we rarely know the true impact of our kindness in the moment we offer it. Sometimes, the smallest acts ripple outward in ways we never expect, protecting things far beyond our own understanding. If this story pulled you in, made you feel something, or kept you guessing until the very last knock on that door. Do me a quick favor. Hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more storytellers and story lovers just like you. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel. We bring you brand new HFY Sci-Fi stories just like this one, every single week, filled with mystery, heart, and unforgettable twists you won't see coming. For those of you who want even deeper stories like this one, check the description below. We've linked our next full story, along with a growing collection of hidden world tales set in this same universe. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If a creature knocked on your door tonight, quiet, wounded, and trusting you completely, would you open it? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I genuinely love to know what you would do in Elias's place. Thank you for watching until the very end. I'll see you in the next story.